What's up, everybody? It's Kyle Russo here from Review and Preview Sports, bringing you more action here on NBA free agency as we are about a week in to NBA free agency here in this 2022 NBA offseason. And this contract happened about a week ago. But before I talk about the free agent that I want to discuss, got to plug in a couple things here on Review and Preview Sports. Make sure to follow us on Facebook at Review and Preview Sports, on Instagram at Review and Preview, on Twitter at Review and Preview, one on Anchor at anchor.fm/Review and Preview. And make sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Review and Preview Sports. Now, with all that being said, the NBA free agent that I want to discuss here today is John Wall. And John Wall last week signed a 2-year, $13.2 million contract with the Los Angeles Clippers. And this, for me, is a win-win situation. What I mean by this is that John Wall gets an opportunity to resurrect his career. Because, ladies and gentlemen, these past couple seasons of basketball have not been kind to John Wall, to say the least. In fact, he has played 72 games since 2017. 72 games since 2017. He played 32 games with the Wizards in 2018 and 40 games in 2020 with the Rockets. He played no games this past season, 2021, 2022, and he played no games in 2019 due to the suffering of a torn ACL. In fact, I believe he tore his ACL twice. John Wall has not been able to stay healthy and has not been able to stay on the court. But about a week ago, after he was one of the more highly touted NBA players because of the fact that the Houston Rockets, they traded kind of a swap a couple years back. They traded him for Russell Westbrook straight up with the Washington Wizards. And Russell Westbrook spent the season with the Wizards, and obviously he spent this past season with the LA Lakers. And John Wall has remained with the Houston Rockets, but he has only played 40 games for them since joining them back in 2020. And in those 40 games, he averaged around 32 minutes per game, 20 points per game, 40% from the field, which isn't great, and 31% from the three-point line, which also isn't great. Only averaging 3 rebounds, 7 assists, which is good, and about a steal per game and about a block a game, which is decent. It's not bad. He's going to be 32 years old by the time the season starts. And this is an opportunity here for him now on a team that I believe is one of the most underrated teams in the NBA because of the lack of success in which they've had these last couple seasons, that I think that he can be a key cornerstone piece for them moving forward as he looks to resurrect his career. Now, why I say this is because with the Wizards, John Wall and Bradley Beal were the faces of the franchise, but you always saw and you always heard in the papers that there was consistency in terms of butting heads with each other. Whose team is it? And you saw ultimately that Bradley Beal won that battle. In fact, Bradley Beal last week signs one of the biggest contracts in NBA history, $250 million to remain with the Washington Wizards these next 5+ years. John Wall is the piece that gets moved, and they could unfortunately never together. They were competitive, but they were never able to ultimately win. I don't believe they ever reached an Eastern Conference Finals. They never reached an NBA Finals. And of course, with that being said, meaning they never won an NBA Finals with the Wizards. He gets moved on to Houston Rockets, which was a rebuilding team. In fact, the year that he was acquired by the Houston Rockets, James Harden was on his way out, basically moving to Brooklyn. Obviously now with the Philadelphia 76ers. But with that being said, there was nobody there in Houston to help assist and aid John Wall. Just a bunch of rookies, just a bunch of young players, just a bunch of veteran players that weren't going to make that big of an impact as they were in a rebuilding season. In fact, last year they picked Jalen Green with the, I believe, 2nd overall pick. And this past year, picking 3rd overall, selecting Jabari Smith. So they were a very, very young and rebuilding team after having almost a decade worth of James Harden with the Houston Rockets. So John Wall now has the opportunity to join the likes of a Paul George, who we know is a superstar, and Kawhi Leonard, who is another superstar, who won his last championship in 2019 with the Toronto Raptors. You look at this team overall, the Los Angeles Clippers, they got some great NBA players. Of course, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard highlight the list for the Los Angeles Clippers, but they got Reggie Jackson, who resurged his career these last couple years with the Los Angeles Clippers. You got a great two-way player in Robert Covington, who they acquired last year at the deadline from the Trailblazers. With the acquisition of Robert Covington from the Trailblazers, they also acquired Norman Powell, who's also a tremendous offensive player. Marcus Morris on this team. Terrence Mann, who's a young, up-and-coming player who had a very, very good year last year. And of course, Ivica Zubac, who they signed to a 3-year extension just a week ago to remain their center moving forward. This team overall is a fantastic team. And also, I forgot about Luke Kennard, who's another great player for this team, the Los Angeles Clippers. But with that being said, John Wall joins this team, which has a lot of forwards, and it has some guard depth, with a Reggie Jackson, with obviously a Terrence Mann, obviously a Norman Powell. And now what this does for John Wall is this now potentially gives him the opportunity to maybe even start on this Clippers team as the point guard. You know, they tried to run some rotations with Terrence Mann, with Reggie Jackson, obviously. But maybe John Wall, if healthy, has the opportunity to potentially start on this team. And if not, he could be a consistent role player off the bench, give you 20-plus minutes a night, maybe log you 12 to 15 points per night. That is a solid contribution to add to this already deep team in the Los Angeles Clippers. And we saw this past season, why I say the Clippers are one of the more underachieving teams, maybe even the most underrated team, is again, because as we know, the best ability is availability. And that's something that hasn't played in the Clippers' favor in a long time, or at least since Kawhi Leonard and Paul George teamed up a couple years back. In fact, when that happened, people thought it was theirs to lose, meaning the NBA championship, and they have not come close thus far. In fact, this past season, they were in the play-in tournament, lost game 1 against the Timberwolves, and lost game 2 against the New Orleans Pelicans. Now, Kawhi Leonard did not play a single game all year, which was a huge component, obviously, to the lack of success the Clippers had this year. And Paul George also missed a tremendous amount of time as well, which is why they had to play in the play-in tournament in general instead of just securing a playoff spot from the get-go. But they lost game 1 to the Timberwolves in the play-in, only by a few points. And Paul George, although he played in that game against the Minnesota Timberwolves, the following game against the Pelicans, he didn't even play because he was hurt once again. And they lost that game, not earning themselves a playoff spot in the 2021-2022 NBA season. Now moving forward, you look at this Clippers team. They have the depth there. Now they have a veteran point guard in John Wall, who again, when healthy, and I say when healthy because that's been a component throughout John Wall's career that has been lacking tremendously. A guy that has never been healthy. He's only played 82 games one time his entire NBA career, has only played more than 70 games 4 times his entire NBA career in almost a 10-year career in the NBA. And that is not good, ladies and gentlemen. That is not good. Again, 72 games in the past 4 seasons for John Wall, 40 games in the past 2 years for John Wall. But again, when he had the opportunity to have minutes with the Rockets, although it's a small sample size and 40 games played, in 32 minutes, which I don't think he'd get that same type of playing time with the Clippers, just because of the depth and the chemistry in which they already have, 20 points per game, 3 rebounds per game, 7 assists per game, 1 steal, and 1 block. That's a solid contribution from a guy who's going to be 32 years old by the time next season starts. The former number 1 overall pick drafted at Kentucky back in 2010. I think this is an excellent acquisition for both parties in John Wall and the Clippers. High risk, high reward type acquisition for the Clippers. 2-year, $13.2 million deal, which can only help further improve the success and the longevity that the Clippers go and move into the playoffs in terms of how far they make it. Because I think that with the team in which they assemble, and I'm not saying that John Wall makes you otherworldly type of great, but if Kawhi Leonard and Paul George are healthy, that is a top 3 team in the Western Conference, and they are one of the most dangerous teams in the Western Conference, at least in my personal opinion, when healthy. And this could easily be a team that, if they do stay healthy, can be a team that's competing in the Western Conference Finals next year. Great acquisition by the Clippers. Love that contract for John Wall. Love the opportunity that he's going to get to compete probably on the best team that he's had to work with throughout the entirety of his NBA career, in which I think that they could have a lot of success together. Obviously, that comes at the helm of health. So we'll see what happens. But ladies and gentlemen, before I sign off, got to replug these content uh, content platforms one more time for you. Make sure to go follow us on Facebook at Review and Preview Sports, on Instagram at Review and Preview, on Twitter at Review and Preview 1, on anchor.fm/Review and Preview, and of course, on our YouTube channel. Make sure to like and subscribe at Review and Preview Sports. This is my take on the Clippers acquiring John Wall on a 2-year, $13.2 million deal that will send him to the Los Angeles Clippers. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for listening. I hope you all have enjoyed. Have a great rest of your day. Make sure to like and subscribe. And thank you all for tuning in.